here's something most people never consider. Sometimes leaving has nothing to do with love. Sometimes it's about survival. There are people who can care deeply, even sincerely, yet still feel a quiet panic rising inside them when intimacy asks for honesty. Not honesty with you, honesty with themselves. Because when someone has spent years constructing a version of life that keeps the pain at bay, any presence that invites truth feels dangerous. You didn't demand answers. You didn't ask for confessions. But your energy made pretending impossible. And that's where they began to feel exposed. Aquarius, you have a way of seeing beyond behavior. Beyond words. Beyond stories people tell to stay comfortable. You notice the pauses. The inconsistencies. The moments where something doesn't quite land. And even when you say nothing, that awareness speaks. For someone who has learned to outrun their own reflection, being truly seen can standing under a spotlight they never agreed to. So they pull back. Not because the connection wasn't real, but because staying would require a reckoning they were not ready to face. Here's the part that's rarely said out loud. Leaving doesn't always mean they chose distance over love. Sometimes they chose familiarity over growth. They chose the version of themselves they already knew how to manage. The habits, the defenses, the quiet self-betrayals that felt safer than change. And you felt it the moment they started to slip away. Not just emotionally, energetically. There was a shift, a subtle cooling, a sense that something meaningful was being abandoned mid-sentence. Have you ever noticed how that kind of departure leaves questions that don't fully form, like unfinished thoughts echoing in the room? That's because what ended wasn't the bond. It was their tolerance for self-awareness. You didn't reflect perfection, you reflected truth. The fears they never named, the wounds they kept anesthetized, the parts of themselves that knew they were living slightly out of alignment. And when the ego realizes it can no longer negotiate with reality, it does the only thing it knows how to do. It runs. Not in anger. Not always dramatically. Sometimes politely. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes with 1,000 justifications that almost make sense. But underneath all of it is the same instinct. If I stay, I will have to change. If I stay, I will have to take responsibility. If I stay, I will have to meet myself without armor. And that was the line they couldn't cross. Here's where I want you to pause with me for a moment. What if their leaving wasn't a rejection of you, but an admission of where they are not yet brave enough to go? What if the connection did its job, not by lasting forever, but by revealing what could no longer remain hidden? Aquarius, this isn't a failure of love. It's an interruption of avoidance. And as painful as that can be to witness, it also marks the beginning of a deeper shift. One that no longer centers on whether they stayed, but on what it means for you to keep standing in your own clarity, without shrinking, without chasing, and without carrying what was never yours to resolve. Stay with me. The light doesn't fade here. It gets clearer, and then it happens. Not loudly. Not all at once. It usually arrives in the quiet moments they never prepared for. Late at night. Early morning. Those small pockets of time when distraction finally loosens its grip. That's when the questions begin to surface, not as thoughts they can control, but as sensations they can't shake. A tightening in the chest. A sudden wave of regret with no clear address. The strange discomfort of realizing something important has been avoided for far too long. They start replaying patterns they once justified. Relationships that ended the same way. Opportunities that dissolved right when depth was required. And for the first time, the story doesn't land the way it used to. They can't blame timing anymore. They can't blame circumstances. They can't even blame you. Because you're not there absorbing the fallout. You didn't come back to soften the realization. You didn't step in to regulate the emotional chaos. And that absence is what cracks the surface. This is the moment most people misunderstand. Awakening doesn't feel like clarity at first. It feels like confusion. Like disorientation. Like standing in a familiar room that suddenly feels foreign. Their sense of identity begins to wobble. Who am I if I'm not the one who leaves first? Who am I if my defenses no longer protect me? Who am I if the problem has been inside all along? These questions don't ask politely. They press. They linger. They disrupt sleep. And because the ego was built to preserve survival, not truth, it panics. This is where the inner collapse begins. Not a dramatic breakdown. More like a slow erosion. Beliefs they leaned on start to feel hollow. Old narratives lose their authority. Certainty dissolves into something raw and unsteady. They may feel embarrassed by how long they've avoided this, ashamed of the patterns they now recognize, overwhelmed by the idea that change would require an entirely different way of being. And here's the part I want you to hear with compassion. This collapse is not cruelty. It's correction. When the structure of the false self can no longer hold, it gives way so something truer can eventually emerge. But in the beginning, it feels terrifying. Because awakening doesn't arrive with instructions. It strips before it builds. It unsettles before it soothes. And you, Aquarius, sense it. You feel the tremor without knowing the details. You notice the energetic shift even if there's no message, no explanation, no closure. There may be moments when you wonder if you should reach out, if offering comfort would ease the tension, if silence feels too sharp. But ask yourself something honestly. What would happen if you didn't interrupt this process? What if the most loving thing you can do right now is allow them to sit with the discomfort that growth requires? Because the moment you stop cushioning the fall, reality does what it has always been designed to do. It teaches. This is not the end of the story. It's the threshold. And while their inner world rearranges itself in ways you cannot control, something else is quietly taking shape. A steadiness in you. A clarity that doesn't need answers to remain intact. A knowing that your role was never to prevent the collapse. It was to reflect the truth long enough for illusion to lose its grip. Stay here with me. What unfolds next carries a different kind of light. Alright, stay right here with me. Because this is the part where everything slows down. Not to scare you, but to tell the truth in a quieter voice. Real change is rarely dramatic. It does not arrive with speeches or announcements. Most of the time, it shows up as hesitation, as fear disguised as logic. For someone who has lived more than 3 decades inside a familiar identity, the idea of becoming someone else feels almost dangerous. Not exciting, not inspiring, dangerous. They start to wonder what would remain if the old version of themselves loosened its grip. The one that learned how to cope. The one that learned how to stay functional. The one that made life predictable even if it was lonely. Because identity is not just personality, it is survival memory. And when that identity begins to crack, the nervous system does not celebrate. It resists. What if I change and still fail? What if I step forward and lose everything that once defined me? What if the story I told myself for years turns out to be wrong? This is the quiet terror of transformation that no one romanticizes. For many people over 35, the ego is not vanity. It is structure. It is reputation. It is the accumulation of choices that once made sense. Letting it go feels like erasing proof that their life meant something. And this is where you come in, Aquarius, not as a guide, not as a savior, but as a silent witness. You are comfortable with reinvention. You understand evolution as a natural rhythm. You do not cling to old versions of yourself just because they are familiar. That is why your energy feels unsettling to those who have built their lives on consistency rather than truth. You do not push them toward change. You simply live in a way that makes stagnation impossible to ignore. And here is the part I want you to hear with gentleness. Their fear of becoming someone new is not a rejection of you. It is grief for who they thought they had to remain in order to survive. This is ego death without drama. No collapse on the floor. No public confession. Just long pauses, restless nights, and a growing awareness that the old way no longer fits. Have you ever noticed how people in this space often appear distant, uncertain, or strangely quiet? Not cold. Just untethered. That is because the self they relied on is loosening and the new one has not yet arrived. And you, Aquarius, feel it again. That subtle pull to help, to stabilize, to explain, to make the transition easier for them. But let me ask you something softly. What if the discomfort is necessary? What if becoming someone new requires walking through uncertainty without a hand to hold? Not every rebirth needs an audience. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is trust that they are capable of meeting themselves, even if it takes time. Meanwhile, something else is happening. Inside you, you are learning the difference between compassion and responsibility, between presence and self-sacrifice, between caring and carrying, and that distinction will change the way you love for the rest of your life. This is not a loss. It is a recalibration. You are not leaving anyone behind. You are simply refusing to abandon yourself. Stay with me. What opens next feels lighter, and it belongs to you. Stay with me for a moment longer. There is a softer layer beneath everything we have touched so far, and it lives in your body, not your thoughts. You may have noticed it without fully naming it. The way your breath feels heavier than usual. The way your chest tightens for no clear reason. The way fatigue shows up even on days when nothing is technically wrong. Life looks fine on the outside. Responsibilities are handled. You are functioning, and yet, something inside you feels quietly overworked. This is not weakness, it is sensitivity. Aquarius, you don't just understand people, you tune into them. Your nervous system listens before your mind does. Your body registers emotional shifts long before words appear. When someone connected to you begins to unravel internally, you feel the tremor. Not because you are meant to fix it, but because you are wired to sense frequency. You pick up what is unspoken. You absorb what others have not yet processed. And when you care, that absorption happens automatically. This is where many Aquarians begin to doubt themselves. You ask whether you are imagining it, whether you are being dramatic, whether the heaviness is somehow your fault. But let me ground this for you. Resonance is not responsibility. Feeling someone does not mean carrying them. Understanding someone does not mean holding their pain inside your own body. There is a difference between empathy and self-erasure, and you are standing right at that threshold. You see, when someone you are energetically linked to begins a deep internal shift, their system looks for balance. It looks for familiar regulation. It looks for the place where emotions have always been buffered. That place used to be you. And when you step back even slightly, the energy has nowhere to go but inward. That inward pressure can echo through you, like static, like background noise that doesn't quite turn off. This is why you might feel anxious without a story, sad without a trigger, drained without a clear cause. Your system is simply noticing a change in the emotional field it once helped stabilize. Here is the part that matters most. You are not meant to intercept that process. Their awakening does not require your exhaustion. Their healing does not need your nervous system as collateral. There is a quiet power in recognizing what is not yours to hold, not in rejection, not in coldness, but in clarity. This is where Kamachamacham matures. Instead of reaching outward, you breathe inward. Instead of absorbing, you witness. Instead of carrying, you allow. And something subtle begins to shift. Your body responds first. The chest loosens. The breath deepens. The fatigue starts to lift in small, almost unnoticeable ways. You begin to feel yourself again, not as a support system, not as a stabilizer, but as a person with their own rhythm. Let me ask you something gently. What might open in your life if your sensitivity became a gift you protected, rather than a weight you endured? Because this moment is not asking you to harden. It is asking you to refine, to stay open without leaking, to care without collapsing, to love without disappearing. And as you practice this, something remarkable happens. The connection transforms, not through effort, but through alignment. You stop vibrating at the frequency of strain and begin to return to the frequency of truth. This is not a withdrawal, it is a recalibration. And it sets the stage for something entirely new to emerge. Not just for them, but for you. Stay close. The path ahead feels steadier than you expect. Stay with me here. Because now the energy shifts again, not inward this time, but steadier, clearer, almost like the air after a long storm finally settles. This is where your nature comes into focus, Aquarius. You were never designed to rescue anyone from their own becoming. Your soul does not move that way. It never has. You are here to illuminate paths, not to drag people down them. To model truth, not to negotiate it. To live awake, even when others choose to sleep a little longer. And this is a lesson that deepens with age. When you are younger, love can feel like endurance, like proving loyalty by staying, like explaining yourself until someone finally understands. But something changes after enough years. After enough cycles of giving more than you receive. After realizing how easy it is to disappear while calling it devotion. Aquarius, your heart is wide, but your spirit is not meant to be consumed. The love you carry works differently. It does not bind. It does not beg. It does not sacrifice itself to be chosen. It simply stands. And that is what awakens people. Not your words, not your effort, but your refusal to betray yourself for connection. There is a quiet courage in that. One that many people sense but do not know how to mirror. This is why your boundaries matter so much. Not as walls, but as clarity. Boundaries are how your soul says, this is where I end and you begin. They are not punishments. They are invitations for others to meet you in truth, or not at all. And here is something few people say out loud. You do not owe anyone your presence as a teaching tool. You do not have to stay close for the lesson to land. Sometimes the distance is the lesson. Silence, when it comes from alignment, carries more power than explanation ever could. Have you noticed how things shift when you stop responding the way you used to? When you no longer rush to soften discomfort. When you allow pauses to exist. That space does something profound. It forces honesty. It reveals intention. It shows you who can meet you without you shrinking. This is not coldness. This is discernment. And it frees you. Because when you stop trying to be understood, you start living understood by yourself. There is a maturity in this phase of your life. A knowing that love does not require you to convince anyone of your worth. That connection does not demand self-abandonment. That awakening is not something you manage for others. Your role is simpler and deeper. To remain in integrity. To choose relationships that do not require constant translation. To honor your values even when it costs you proximity. And let me ask you something gently. What kind of world begins to form around you when you stop proving and start trusting that your presence alone is enough? Because this is where Aquarius energy becomes magnetic. not by chasing resonance, but by embodying it. You do not need to return. You do not need to explain. You do not need to fix what is unfolding in someone else's life. You are allowed to keep walking forward with grace, with softness, and with yourself intact. This lesson is not about separation. It is about sovereignty. And as you live it, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being a mirror people fear and become one they grow into. Stay with me. What opens next feels expansive, and it carries your future written quietly inside it. Let it be simple now. Not easy, but simple. Because once you stop carrying what was never yours, a strange quiet opens up. And in that quiet, you start hearing your own life again. Not their signals, not their confusion, not the invisible tug of unfinished things. Just you. And for an Aquarius, that can feel like both relief and uncertainty at the same time. Because you are a thinker, a visionary. You like to see the whole map. You want to understand where this goes before you take the first step. But life does not always give Aquarius the full blueprint. Sometimes it gives you a feeling, a direction, a door that is not fully open yet. And it asks you to move anyway. You might not know what becomes of this connection. You might not know if they will do the work, or if they will retreat back into the old version of themselves. You might not even know what your future looks like in detail. But you do know one thing deep in your bones. You cannot remain in the waiting room. Waiting feels responsible. It feels loyal. It feels like keeping the story alive. But over time, waiting turns into a slow kind of self-abandonment. It teaches your nervous system to live on pause, to postpone joy, to delay your own becoming. And that is not why you are here. Aquarius, your path is not a straight road. It is a series of turns that only reveal themselves once you are in motion. That is how your sign evolves. Through experience, through new rooms, through unexpected conversations, through the courage to step forward without certainty. Have you ever noticed how the most meaningful chapters of your life began with something that did not make sense at first? A random invitation, a quiet impulse, a decision you could not fully explain. And yet, it changed everything. That is your medicine. Not forcing answers, not chasing closure, but moving with integrity one day at a time until the next door appears. Because here is the truth. The universe does not hand you the entire path. It responds to your first honest step. When you take that step, something subtle shifts in the world around you. People appear who feel calmer. Opportunities show up that do not require you to shrink. Ideas return that you forgot you loved. Even your body responds. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. Your sleep starts to repair itself, and you begin to feel the difference between a life that drains you and a life that restores you. This is not about outrunning the past. It is about choosing a future that can hold you gently. So if you are unsure right now, that is okay. Uncertainty does not mean you are lost. It means you are not pretending. And I want to ask you something, softly, as if we are sitting in the dark with one lamp on. What would you do this week if you trusted that your life is allowed to expand without anyone else's permission? Not a grand transformation, just one honest step. A call you have been avoiding, a walk you keep postponing, a journal page you write without editing yourself. Small steps create motion. Motion creates new information. And new information creates new choices. This is how you find your way, not by knowing everything, but by refusing to stay frozen. And as you keep moving, you will notice something beautiful. The more you choose yourself, the less you need answers from them. The less you need certainty to feel safe. The less you need the past to validate your future. Stay with me. There is one last piece. And it will feel like a quiet blessing. Stay right here. Because what settles now is not an answer but a knowing. Not something you think your way into. Something you feel land gently in your chest. You were never meant to carry the weight of another soul's awakening. That truth doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives like exhale after a long season of holding your breath. Aquarius, your presence was never an assignment. It was an offering. You didn't come into this connection to fix, repair, or redeem. You came as you are, clear, awake, honest in ways that didn't require explanation, and that alone was enough to shift something. Here is where peace begins to replace effort. You stop measuring yourself by outcomes you cannot control. You stop tracking whether they understood, changed, or chose differently. You stop replaying moments, wondering if one more word might have altered the story, because you realize something quietly profound. Reflection is not responsibility. If they awaken, it is because they decided to turn inward. If they continue to run, it is because they are not ready to meet themselves. Neither path belongs to you. What belongs to you now is lighter, cleaner, more spacious. It is the permission to live without dragging old energy into new rooms. The permission to move forward without carrying unfinished emotional labor. The permission to trust that your soul does not need to suffer to be meaningful. This is not detachment. This is discernment. It is the moment you understand that love does not ask you to abandon your nervous system. That connection does not require constant vigilance. That being present does not mean being consumed. You are allowed to choose ease. To wake up without the heaviness you once thought was normal. To laugh without checking who might be affected. To imagine a future that feels open rather than conditional. And maybe the most radical part of all is letting that be enough. No proving. No explaining. No return trips to old pain disguised as loyalty. Just your life. Breathing again. Let me ask you one last question gently. What begins to grow in you when you stop seeing yourself as a mirror for others and start seeing yourself as a home for your own spirit? Because this is the quiet gift of Aquarius energy when it matures. You learn that reflection does not require sacrifice, that awakening does not demand martyrdom, that your light was never meant to burn you alive, it was meant to guide, and now you get to follow it too. So release what was never yours to carry, let it fall away without ceremony, without guilt. Trust that what was real did not disappear, it simply completed its purpose. And as you step forward lighter, clearer, more yourself than before, know this. Your presence was already enough. It always was. Stay open. Stay true. And let the future meet you exactly where you are. Alright, stay with me just a little longer. Because this is the moment where everything you felt begins to settle into something real. Not heavy. Not urgent. But steady. If you've listened this far, it's not by accident. Something in you already knew this message was meant to find you. Not to change you overnight, but to remind you of who you already are. Aquarius, you don't walk this path to be validated. You walk it to stay awake, and today, you chose awareness over habit, truth over comfort, presence over carrying. That matters. Take a breath right now. Notice how your body feels compared to when this began. That softening, that quiet clarity, that's you coming back to yourself. You were never late. You were never wrong. You were simply learning how to love without losing yourself. And as you move forward lighter than before, trust this. What's meant to meet you will not require you to shrink, chase, or explain your worth. It will recognize your frequency and rise to it. If this message spoke to you, I want you to anchor it. Leave a comment. Even a single word is enough. It tells your nervous system, and this community, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm choosing myself. And if you feel that quiet yes inside, subscribe. Not because you need more answers, but because this journey continues and the next message will meet you exactly where you are becoming. Aquarius to Aquarius. You are not alone in this. There are others walking this same threshold, learning the same lesson, opening to the same light. Trust yourself. Trust the timing. Trust what is unfolding, even when you can't see the full shape, yet your presence was enough today. It will be enough tomorrow. And it will be enough wherever this path leads next. Stay open. Stay curious. The next transmission is already on its way.